I never thought I'd have to beg my own parents to help save my home. But there I was sitting at their gleaming kitchen island, watching my mother swirl her expensive Chardonnay, while my father pretended to be deeply absorbed in his iPad. $10,000, I repeated, hating how my voice cracked. That's all I need to catch up on the payments and stop the foreclosure. I can pay you back in installments. I've already worked it out. I pulled out the carefully prepared spreadsheet showing my payment plan, but neither of them even glanced at it. My name is Emma Sullivan, and at 35, I was facing the possibility of losing the only real home I'd ever known. The modest two-story Victorian house on Maple Street had been in our family for generations. My grandmother had raised my father there, and when she passed away 5 years ago, she left it to me, much to everyone's surprise, including mine. "Just sell it, Emma," Mom said, setting down her wine glass. "That house is a money pit. You can get a nice little apartment, maybe in that new complex they just built downtown." I stared at her, wondering for the 100th time how she could be so casual about this. "Mom, this is Grandma Rose's house we're talking about, our family home." "It's just a house," Dad finally spoke up, still not meeting my eyes. "Your mother's right. Sell it before the bank takes it. At least that way, you'll walk away with something." The thing was, I hadn't always struggled with the mortgage payments. For 3 years after inheriting the house, I'd managed just fine on my salary as a high school art teacher. But then last year, budget cuts hit our district hard. My hours were reduced, and suddenly, my comfortable income became a desperate stretch. I tried everything to make ends meet, took on private art students, started an Etsy shop selling my paintings, even rented out my spare bedroom to a quiet college student. It helped, but it wasn't enough to cover the shortfall from my reduced salary. The payments fell behind, and now the bank was threatening foreclosure. "Look," I said, pulling out my last piece of leverage, "the house needs some work, yes. But the Historical Society is interested in designating it as a heritage property. Once that happens, I'll be eligible for preservation grants. I just need to hold on a little longer." Mom rolled her eyes. "Oh honey, not this heritage property nonsense again. Do you know how many restrictions come with that? You wouldn't be able to change a doorknob without filing paperwork." "Better than losing it entirely," I muttered. "Emma," Dad sighed, finally putting down his iPad, "you're not thinking clearly. The practical thing to do is sell. Property values in that neighborhood are up right now. You could make a decent profit." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. "I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. I don't want a profit. I want to keep my home. Grandma Rose wanted me to have this house. She must have had a reason." "Your grandmother made that decision when she wasn't thinking straight," Mom cut in sharply. "We all know she was confused in those final months." The familiar anger flared in my chest. "She wasn't confused. Dr. Marshall said she was perfectly lucid until the end. You just can't stand that she left the house to me instead of you and Dad." A tense silence followed. Mom's fingers tightened around her wine glass, and Dad's jaw clenched, sure signs I'd hit a nerve. "We're done here," Mom announced, standing up. "Sell the house, Emma. That's our advice. Take it or leave it." I gathered my untouched spreadsheets with trembling hands. "So that's it? You won't help? You have the money. I know you do." "Having money isn't the point," Dad said. "Sometimes tough love is necessary. You need to learn to make practical decisions." I left their house in a daze, barely registering the drive home. The contrast between their sleek modern home in the suburbs and my beloved old Victorian couldn't have been starker. Where their house was all clean lines and neutral tones, mine was full of character, ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, creaky floors that told stories of generations who'd walked them before. The porch steps groaned their familiar welcome as I climbed them. Inside, the evening light filtered through the colored glass, casting rainbow patterns on the worn hardwood floors. My grandmother's antique furniture filled the rooms, each piece holding memories: the armchair where she'd read me stories, the dining table where we'd shared Sunday dinners, the desk where she taught me to draw. My current roommate, Jessica, was out for the evening, so I had the house to myself. I wandered from room to room, touching doorframes and windowsills, trying to imagine leaving this place. The very thought made me feel physically ill. Upstairs, I paused in front of my grandmother's old room, my room now. The door to her walk-in closet stood slightly ajar, and something compelled me to go in. The space still held a few of her things I hadn't been able to bring myself to pack away. Some old hat boxes, a jewelry case, a stack of photo albums. I sat cross-legged on the closet floor, pulling the albums into my lap. Maybe I was torturing myself, but I needed to remember. Needed to remind myself why this house was worth fighting for. The first album fell open to a photo of my grandmother and me in the garden, both of us covered in dirt and grinning at the camera. I was maybe 7 or 8, and we just finished planting her prized roses. Those same roses still bloomed in the backyard every summer, though I'd never managed to care for them quite as well as she had. Another photo showed a family Christmas, everyone gathered around the fireplace. I noticed how my parents stood slightly apart from the group, Mom's smile tight and forced. They'd never loved this house the way Grandma Rose and I did. To them it was outdated, impractical, an embarrassment compared to their friends' modern homes. As I turned a page, something slipped from between the photos and fluttered to the floor. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, my name written on it in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. My heart started racing. How have I never noticed this before? With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before she passed away. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here, and you've inherited the house as I intended. I know this decision has caused friction in the family, but I want you to understand why I chose you. This house holds secrets, darling. Secrets your parents would rather stay buried. In the 1960s, your grandfather, before I met him, was involved in some questionable business dealings. The documentation of those dealings is hidden somewhere in this house. Your parents know this, though they don't know exactly where. I'm telling you this not to tarnish your grandfather's memory, but because I suspect your parents may try to pressure you to sell. Don't let them. The truth needs to come out someday, and you, my dear girl, are the only one I trust to handle it with grace. Look behind the loose brick in the garden wall, the one near my yellow roses. What you find there will lead you to the rest. I love you, my darling girl. Stay strong. Grandma Rose. I read the letter 3 times, my mind spinning. Secrets? Documentation? What had my grandfather been involved in? And more importantly, why were my parents so desperate for me to sell the house? A notification pinged on my phone, breaking my reverie. It was a Facebook alert. Mom had just posted something. Still clutching the letter, I opened the app and felt my blood run cold. There they were, my parents, standing proudly in front of a sprawling beach house. Mom's post read, "So excited. Just closed on our vacation home in Naples, Florida. Can't wait for endless beach days. #list #retirement goals." The date on the paperwork in the photo was clearly visible. They'd bought it 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when they had claimed they couldn't spare $10,000 to help save their daughter's home. Their family home. I sat there in the closet, surrounded by old photos and memories, feeling something shift inside me. The hurt and desperation of earlier transformed into cold, hard determination. Mom and Dad thought they could force my hand. Thought they could pressure me into selling my house while they bought themselves a beach paradise. While they'd forgotten something important, I was Rose Sullivan's granddaughter, and she hadn't raised me to give up without a fight. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Benjamin Marshall. Not just my grandmother's doctor, but her friend and attorney. The man who had handled her will. My finger hovered over the call button as I reread the letter one more time. Whatever secrets this house held, whatever my grandfather had done, it was time to find out. Maybe then I understand why my parents were so desperate to see this place sold. I pressed call. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Dr. Marshall, this is Emma Sullivan. I need your help. It's about my grandmother, and some documents she mentioned in a letter I just found." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I was wondering when you'd find that letter. Emma, meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and Emma, don't tell your parents about this." I ended the call and stood up, tucking both the letter and the photo album under my arm. Through the closet window, I could see my grandmother's roses in the fading light. The loose brick near them might hold answers, but that would have to wait until morning. For now, I had research to do. I needed to understand exactly what kind of business dealings were happening in this area in the 1960s. Something told me the answers would explain not just my grandfather's secrets, but my parents' strange behavior and their sudden purchase of a beach house they supposedly couldn't afford. As I headed downstairs to my laptop, one thought kept circling in my mind. My parents hadn't just refused to help me. They had actively tried to push me into selling, which meant whatever was hidden in this house, they were afraid of it being found. Tomorrow, I would start digging, and I wouldn't stop until I uncovered every last secret these old walls held. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house made me wonder what secrets its walls held. By dawn, I'd gone down several internet rabbit holes researching local history from the 1960s, but nothing seemed particularly suspicious. Whatever my grandfather had been involved in, it wasn't public knowledge. At 7:45 a.m., I pulled into the parking lot of Marshall and Associates law offices. The building was an old converted Victorian, not unlike my house, and Dr. Benjamin Marshall had kept his practice there for over 40 years. He'd been my grandmother's friend long before becoming her doctor and attorney. The receptionist, an elderly woman who'd worked there as long as I could remember, smiled warmly. "Go right in, dear. He's expecting you." Dr. Marshall stood as I entered his office. At 75, he was still sharp as ever, his white hair and wire-rimmed glasses giving him the appearance of a kindly professor. But today, his usual warm smile was replaced by a serious expression. "Emma," he gestured to a chair. "I've been keeping something for your grandmother. After our call last night, I pulled it from the safe." He lifted a thick manila envelope from his desk. "But before I give you this, I need to know you're prepared for what it might mean. The information in here, it could change how you see your family." I placed my grandmother's letter on his desk. "I need to know the truth, whatever it is." He nodded slowly, then handed me the envelope. Inside, I found photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like financial documents, all from the mid-1960s. "Your grandfather, Thomas Sullivan, worked for the city planning department," Dr. Marshall explained. "In 1965, the city announced plans for a major highway expansion. The proposed route would have destroyed several historic neighborhoods." I nodded. I knew this part of local history. The highway had ended up being built elsewhere, preserving the old neighborhoods, including the one where my house stood. "What most people don't know," Dr. Marshall continued, "is why the route changed. Your grandfather was in charge of land acquisitions for the project. He and several other city officials had been quietly buying up properties along the alternative route through shell companies. Once the highway plans changed, the value of that land skyrocketed." My throat felt dry. They were insider trading with real estate. Worse, they were taking bribes from developers to influence the highway's path. Your grandfather made a fortune, but he was troubled by what he'd done. He kept detailed records of everything: names, dates, amounts. Insurance, he called it. I spread the documents across the desk: property deeds, bank statements, handwritten notes. My grandfather's insurance policy against his co-conspirators. When your grandmother found out years later, after they were married, she was horrified. But by then, Thomas was trying to make amends. He used most of the money to secretly help the families who'd been displaced by the highway. The house he lives in now? He bought it specifically because it had a hidden room where he could keep the evidence safe. My head snapped up. A hidden room. Dr. Marshall smiled slightly. "Behind the basement wall, accessible through the old coal chute. Your grandmother showed me once. That's where the rest of the documentation is." "But why didn't she just destroy it all?" "Because some of those corrupt officials are still alive, Emma. Some of their children hold powerful positions in the city now. Your father, for instance." "What about my father?" Dr. Marshall sighed. "Robert Sullivan knew about his father's past. He also knew about the documents. When Thomas died, your father wanted them destroyed, but your grandmother refused. She believed the truth should come out eventually, but at the right time, through the right person." He paused. "That's why she left you the house." Suddenly, my parents' behavior made horrible sense. The persistent pressure to sell, the refusal to help with the mortgage, the constant insistence that I should let go of the house. They weren't just being difficult, they were protecting themselves. "The beach house," I whispered. "They bought it right after I asked for help with the mortgage. They're trying to hide assets, aren't they? In case this all comes out." Dr. Marshall nodded grimly. "Very likely. Your father's position on the city council could be compromised if his connection to this scandal came to light. The fact that he benefited from his father's ill-gotten gains, even indirectly." I gathered the documents with trembling hands. I need to find that hidden room. Be careful, Emma. And remember, the loose brick by the roses? Your grandmother left something else there for you. Something that might help you decide what to do with all this. The morning sun was bright as I hurried home, the manila envelope tucked safely in my bag. Jessica's car was gone. She had early classes on Thursdays, so I had the house to myself. I went straight to the garden. My grandmother's yellow roses were in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air. The old garden wall ran along the back of the property, its red bricks weathered and moss-covered. Near the rose bushes, one brick sat slightly askew. My fingers trembled as I worked it loose. Inside the small cavity, I found a rusty metal box about the size of a paperback book. The key was taped to the bottom. Inside was a single envelope and a small leather-bound journal. The envelope contained a second letter from my grandmother. My dearest Emma, by now, you know about your grandfather's past. What you don't know is how he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. The journal will show you. You have a decision to make. The documents in the hidden room could expose decades-old corruption and hurt many people, some guilty, some innocent. Or they could stay hidden, and the truth with them. I'm trusting you with this choice because you have your grandfather's conscience and your own wise heart. Whatever you decide, know that I believe in you. All my love, Grandma Rose. The journal was my grandfather's, started after his involvement in the highway scandal. Entry after entry detailed anonymous donations to families who'd lost their homes, scholarships set up for their children, small businesses helped back on their feet. He'd spent years quietly trying to repay his debt to the community. The final entry was dated just before his death. I can never fully right the wrong I've done, but I hope my efforts count for something. The evidence remains hidden as my insurance, but perhaps someday it can serve a greater purpose. Not for revenge, but for justice, for change. The right person will know what to do with it when the time comes. Wiping tears from my eyes, I headed to the basement. The old coal chute was behind a set of rusty metal doors set into the foundation. It took all my strength to pull them open. The narrow passage beyond was dark and dusty. Shining my phone's flashlight inside, I could see where the chute took a sharp turn, and there, in the shadowy corner where it bent, was the edge of what looked like a door. I hesitated only a moment before squeezing into the passage. The hidden door opened with a protesting creak, revealing a small room barely bigger than a closet. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Boxes of documents filled the rest of the space. As I stood there, surrounded by evidence of decades-old corruption, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Thinking about your situation. If you list the house now, we know a buyer who'll give you a good price. No questions asked. Let us know by tomorrow. I stared at the message, then at the files around me. I had a decision to make. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Setting down my bag, I pulled out the first file and started reading. Whatever choice I made, it would be with full knowledge of the truth, all of it. I spent hours in that hidden room, reading through file after file. My grandfather had been thorough. Every transaction, every bribe, every player in the scandal was documented in meticulous detail. But what hit me hardest were the personal notes he kept about the families affected by the highway project. The Hendersons lost their family restaurant 3 generations old. The Martinez family, their small farm was seized through eminent domain. The Williams siblings, forced to sell their elderly mother's home at a fraction of its value. Each story was a wound in our city's history, and my grandfather had cataloged them all, not just their losses, but his attempts at anonymous restitution over the years. Around midnight, Jessica knocked on the basement door. Emma, are you okay down there? You've been in the basement all day. I'm fine. I called back, quickly gathering the most important documents. Just doing some cleaning. Once I heard her footsteps retreat, I carefully replaced the filing cabinets and boxes, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Then I took photos of everything I hadn't had time to read thoroughly. I had a feeling I'd need them. Back in my room, I spread everything out on my bed. The original documents from Dr. Marshall, my grandmother's letters, my grandfather's journal, and the new evidence I found. The pieces were all there. Now I just had to decide what to do with them. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. The buyer can close quickly. No inspections needed. Think about it. No inspections needed. Of course not. They probably had someone lined up who demolished the house immediately, destroying any evidence in the process. My father's position on the city council wouldn't be the only one threatened if this came to light. According to the documents, the current mayor's father had been involved too. I picked up my grandfather's journal again, rereading his final entry, not for revenge, but for justice. For change. That's when I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I walked into City Hall and requested a meeting with the Historical Preservation Committee. I've been trying to get their attention for months about designating my house as a heritage property. This time, I had something that would definitely interest them. Miss Sullivan, the committee chair said, checking her watch. We only have 15 minutes. I placed a single photograph on the table, one from my grandfather's files. It showed my house in 1967, along with several others that had been demolished for the highway. My house is the last surviving example of Victorian architecture from the original Cedar Street neighborhood, I said. But its historical significance goes far beyond its architecture. By the time I finished my presentation, carefully edited to focus on the historical aspects while only hinting at the political implications, they were all leaning forward in their seats. If what you're saying is true, the chair said slowly, your house is not just architecturally significant. It's a crucial piece of our city's social history. Yes, I smiled, and I have extensive documentation to prove it. 2 hours later, I walked out with preliminary approval for historic designation pending final review. More importantly, I had an emergency stay against any alterations or demolition of the property. My phone rang as I reached my car. Mom, have you thought about our offer? She asked without preamble. Actually, I just came from a meeting with the Historical Preservation Committee, I said, keeping my voice casual. They're very interested in the house's connection to the 1960s highway project. Silence. Then, what exactly did you tell them? Oh, about how it's the last surviving house from the original neighborhood, about its unique architectural features, about its historical significance. Emma, her voice turned sharp. Don't be foolish. That old house isn't worth destroying lives over. Isn't it? Like the lives that were destroyed when the highway route changed. I took a deep breath. I found Grandpa's records, Mom. All of them. I know what happened. Another long silence. We should discuss this in person. Come over for dinner tonight. Can't. I have another meeting with a journalist from the City Tribune. She's writing a series about historic preservation and corruption in urban development. Fascinating topic. You wouldn't dare. But I heard the fear in her voice. Try me. Oh, and Mom. I saw the beach house photos. Really nice place. Must have cost what, $300,000? Funny how you couldn't spare $10,000 to help save your family home. I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt strangely calm. For the first time since this whole thing started, I was in control. Back home, I had 3 messages waiting. One from the Historical Preservation Committee confirming our next meeting. One from the City Tribune reporter agreeing to hear my story. And one from Dr. Marshall. Your grandmother would be proud. Come by the office tomorrow. I have some ideas about protecting yourself legally before this goes public. I sat in my grandmother's old armchair, my armchair now, and looked around at the house that had caused so much conflict. Its walls had held these secrets for decades, waiting for the right time, the right person to reveal them. My grandfather had spent years trying to make amends for his role in the scandal. Now it was my turn to make things right, but in a different way. Not through secret restitution, but through public truth. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Dad. We need to talk. Name your price. I smiled and texted back. You're right. We do need to talk. Bring Mom to Dr. Marshall's office tomorrow at 2 p.m. And Dad, don't bother bringing your checkbook. Some things aren't for sale. Dr. Marshall's office felt smaller with all of us crowded inside. My parents sat stiffly on the leather couch while I took the chair near his desk. The manila envelope of documents sat between us like a live bomb. Before we begin, Dr. Marshall said, I want everyone to understand that what's said here stays here, unless, of course, Hema decides otherwise. Mom's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her designer handbag. This is ridiculous. Family matters should be handled within the family. Like when you handled my request for help by buying a beach house instead. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. That's different. Dad cut in. The beach house is an investment. So is my home, I interrupted. But its value isn't in money, is it? Its value is in what's hidden inside. They exchanged glances. Dr. Marshall cleared his throat. Emma has made a reasonable proposal. I suggest you listen. I opened the envelope and laid out selected documents. Here's what's going to happen. The house will be designated as a historic property, not just for its architecture, but as a testament to the families displaced by the highway project. A small museum will be created, telling their stories. You can't? Dad started, but I held up my hand. I can and I will. But here's why I'm offering you. The exhibit will focus on redemption, on how Grandpa spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. Your names won't be mentioned. Your positions won't be compromised. Mom's face had gone pale. And if we refuse, then everything comes out. Every document, every name, every detail, including how you tried to force me to sell the house to cover it all up. You destroy your own father's career. Mom's voice shook. Like you were willing to let me lose my home. I took a deep breath. I don't want to hurt anyone, but this story needs to be told. Those families deserve to have their history acknowledged. Dr. Marshall pulled out a document. I've drawn up an agreement. The house will be preserved. A foundation will be established to maintain it and run the museum. Funded initially by a donation from your parents, let's say, the value of that beach house in Naples. Dad's jaw clenched. This is blackmail. No, I said quietly. This is justice. Grandpa tried to make things right in secret, but some truths need to come out in the open. We need to do better than just hiding money in people's mailboxes. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Mom reached for the agreement. If we sign this, we're done. No more demands. Except one, I said. You'll attend the museum's opening. You'll stand beside me and honor those families' stories, because they're part of our story too. Another long silence. Then Dad took the papers, his hands trembling slightly. You're more like your grandmother than I ever realized. I know, I smiled. That's why she left me the house. They signed. Dr. Marshall notarized the documents. Just like that, it was done. 1 month later, I stood in front of my house, now the Sullivan Historic Home and Community Museum, cutting the ribbon at its official dedication. My parents stood beside me, uncomfortable but present. Dr. Marshall beamed from the front row. The first exhibition was called Highways and Homes, a story of loss and redemption. It told the story of the families displaced by the highway project, but also of my grandfather's secret attempts to make amends. His journal was displayed prominently, open to that final entry about justice and change. The local newspaper covered the opening. Their headline read, Historic Home Reveals Hidden Chapter of City's Past. The article praised the museum's mission to preserve community history and celebrate stories of redemption. My parents sold their beach house. The money funded not just the museum, but also a scholarship program for descendants of the displaced families. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a start. As for me, I kept my small apartment on the museum's top floor. Every morning, I wake up to sunlight through my grandmother's stained glass windows. Every evening, I tend her yellow roses. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in a hidden room, now part of the museum tour, and think about choices, about how secrets can poison generations, about how the truth, though painful, can also heal. My grandfather chose secrecy to protect himself, then secret restitution to ease his conscience. My parents chose denial and deception, but my grandmother, my wise, brave grandmother, chose me, chose truth, chose justice. And in the end, I chose to honor her faith in me. The house still creaks and groans at night, but now its sounds feel less like secrets being kept and more like stories being told. Important stories, stories that needed to be heard, stories that finally have found their way home.